This is Lauren Artress, and I'm delighted that we're have a special webinar today, the University in the Labyrinth. I want to take a moment to introduce Dr. Jan Sellers. Jan and I met in Chartres in 2008 when big plans were afoot around the Labyrinth. And so one of the important things to know is Jan is a foremost educator. Her whole life she's been teaching and in learning and student learning. In fact, she's been at the University of Kent for 20 years and is now author of some books, and we'll be talking about those as well. So the focus of her work over the years has been student learning and student development, all the way from coaching students about writing essays all the way to how to build confidence in their work and in their life. And so it's truly a pleasure to be introducing and welcoming you, Jan, to our webinar. So welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Lauren. It's an absolute delight to be here.
Well, it's fun to hear and have you be here, and I love your UK accent. And we might want to say that there's probably a little bit of a jet lag in our sound back and forth. So we just want to acknowledge that, so our listeners don't get confused here. But Jan, it's just a pleasure to have you here. And you have two publications out, which we'll talk about, but I want to name them: Working with the Labyrinth, Paths for Exploration, with Di Williams as well as Ruth Sewell and yourself, and then Learning with the Labyrinth, creating reflective space in higher education. And it's really a privilege to have you here, because you really have been working in a very specific and focused way in the higher education, and it really adds a deep richness to the whole Labyrinth world, because you've really taken the leadership in this. So tell me about your first encounter with a labyrinth. How did you connect the labyrinths?
Well, it's interesting, Lauren, to sit here and gaze at the title of these two books and to think that in 2007 I knew nothing about labyrinths at all. So it's been quite a journey. But in 2007 I was working at the University of Kent, and I opened up a copy of the Times Higher Education Supplement, and there in the centre was a very large photograph showing Di Williams sitting in the centre of a very large purple and cream canvas labyrinth. And the article talked about the work that Di was doing, bringing contemplative space to students and staff of all faiths and none. And I was particularly interested in the inclusiveness, the generosity of the approach, and also the fact that Di was creating this quiet breathing space. I was very aware at the time of the levels of strain, stress, pressure in university life as elsewhere, and I was interested in exploring and seeing ways of bringing opportunities for quietness and reflection, ways of stepping away from that sense of rush and haste. So that article was inspiring.
Mm-hmm. And we might want to say that Di Williams is a master teacher for Veritas now, and she trained as a facilitator years ago, and her work has developed nicely, and you weave that in here, Jan, so beautifully. But so you were looking for reflective space, the hectic world of academia, education, young people being on campuses and all the pressure, and then here's this reflective, quiet space that you see in this newspaper article. So that's what brought you in. That's what brought you in. So, but you had a major life change, didn't you, when you received the National Teaching Fellowship?
Well, that's right. My role at the time was as the coordinator of the Student Learning Advisory Service at the University of Kent, and I was fortunate to be awarded a National Teaching Fellowship for the work that I was doing in student learning support and student retention. That may be, in some ways, a British term. Student retention is that if university is the right place for a student to be, you really want to see what you can put in place to support the student to be there and to get the most out of that experience, and to reduce the number of students that are dropping out. Sometimes it's right for students to move on, but oftentimes support can be put in place. So I've been working on issues surrounding that and was awarded the National Teaching Fellowship. And this proved to be absolutely transformational. It came with a significant grant, and the university enabled me to have a sabbatical, and I had time out to explore. And I wanted to go looking for examples of joy and creativity in learning to bring them back to my own campus. So I was thinking about this in the course of the year, and as summer came round, somebody reminded me about that article about the University of Edinburgh, and I began to try and find out more.
And you're seeing that now on your screen for our listeners. That's the beautiful, beautiful labyrinth at University of Edinburgh with Di Williams, who was instrumental in getting this in the ground. It's really quite amazing. Talk about permanent labyrinths, right? Boy.
It's very, very beautiful. A Chartres labyrinth in George Square Gardens, open, sunset till dusk, most of the year. Lovely, lovely space. But before I'd even visited, I began to read, to research, to try and find out more, and talked with the head of counselling at the university, Maggie Smith, and to cut a long story short, 3 of us, a chaplain, a counsellor, and myself, went up to visit Di, and we went and visited the Edinburgh Labyrinth and walked Di's Canvas Labyrinth as well. And we came back. Well, you can see this child running around the labyrinth full of energy. We came back with some of that energy, and we came back determined to set up a labyrinth project at the University of Kent.
What a great goal. How to meet your goals about reflection and all. There it is, huh?
Absolutely. So we set up a labyrinth project at the university, and one of the key things here was that we involved a lot of different people. The diversity in the group was really important. We had a member of academic staff, we had a member of the Students' Union, we had guidance and counselling staff, a real mix, but a real mix of people who we didn't necessarily know very much, but we were certainly enthusiastic. And we had some funding because of my fellowship. So the first thing that we did was find a venue where we could actually hold regular labyrinth walks. And the next thing that we did was to order a canvas labyrinth. And this is a venue that you will remember, Lauren, the University Senate Chamber.
For sure. And a great, wonderful, I love your forest green Veritas canvas. A lot of times people don't know they come in different colors. Isn't that beautiful? Wow.
Well, Kent has a beautiful wooded open campus. Kent has a number of different campuses, in fact, and they're all fascinating in their own way. But the Canterbury campus has beautiful views across to the city, and the greenness of the campus we wanted to be reflected. That's why we chose that colour. So there we were, and we had a canvas labyrinth, and we didn't know what we were doing. So I started getting in touch with people, and labyrinth facilitators such as Jay Edge and Di William and others were very generous with advice. And the Students' Union invited us, in fact, to host a well-being labyrinth walk. And we began a program of simple labyrinth walks, and 4 of us booked to come to Chartres to begin to develop as labyrinth facilitators. But this was the beginning of 2008, and 2008 was quite a year.
That was an amazing year for you, wasn't it?
Well, people were getting very excited about the labyrinth, and people were looking to Edinburgh as a very valuable example. And I was walking across campus one day, and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor stopped me and said, what would be the chances of having a permanent outdoor labyrinth in time for Lambeth Conference, which was due to meet at the University of Kent that July and August. And this was the most extraordinary project. I think sometimes we find with labyrinth projects that people begin to say yes. From the labyrinth initially getting permission all the way through to that fence being removed so that the people at Lambeth Conference could walk it, that was 13 weeks. And
Wow.
People you would never expect to be saying yes so quickly. Senior management, finance committees, estates committees, people just kept saying yes. It was an amazing experience. What happened was that Hayward Landscapes, the labyrinth builders, and the international expert on labyrinths and labyrinth research, Jeff Sayward, were actually working down the road at the Pilgrims Hospice on a labyrinth there and had a window of opportunity. And what an opportunity it proved to be. And so the Canterbury Labyrinth was built. Lambeth Conference is the gathering of the worldwide Anglican community. And so people were coming to the university from all over the world. And we were able to just open up the fences. It was still a bit of a building site, but we were able to open it as a fringe event. And the labyrinth was formally launched by the university's Vice-Chancellor in the October of 2008. And you can see here just some snapshots of the labyrinth presence on the university campus.
Tell me about the pattern, because this is a unique pattern and perhaps people in the United States are not familiar with it.
Well, I set Jeff Sayward a very tall order when I asked him to design the labyrinth for us. I wanted a labyrinth that would offer a depth of experience, a labyrinth that was historically rooted, a labyrinth that was a short enough walk for people to walk in their lunch breaks and still have time for lunch, and a labyrinth that was, as much as possible, wheelchair accessible. We could not, on this vast green space, install a fully paved labyrinth. To be quite honest, Lauren, it would have looked like a plate, balanced on the hillside. It wouldn't have worked. We had to draw the green in. And so Jeff has done a number of things here. In terms of wheelchair access, he spread the pattern out so that a wheelchair user or a mobility scooter user who's comfortable on grass can actually follow the path with their wheels on the grass. And they can turn the corners without needing to swing out. One creative solution. The pattern, though, is based on the sacred geometry of Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth. It has the quality of topographical symmetry, which means that by the time you've got halfway to the centre, if you just pause in your imagination, you have an equal and opposite number of twists and turns to go before you reach the centre. And I would argue that the experience is therefore profoundly balancing. It's a very beautiful labyrinth.
It is. It's a lovely labyrinth. I had the privilege of being there, and it's really profound. It takes you deeply and quickly. And you can see in the photo here, Jeff Sayward is the person on the left with the red shirt, not the red jacket like Jan is, on the right, but Jeff is on the left. And I agree with you. It's really a lovely balancing labyrinth for sure. Some people listening may be a little confused with between the classical, which is usually a seventh circuit, and this is really a medieval labyrinth because it has more 180-degree turns. You can see that in the canvas here. So it's really, truly a very lovely experience of walking it. Somebody might be looking here, Jan, and saying, well, which is the path and which is the field? And the path, always look at the center. You can direct your eye to the center and find out what that is, and then that would signal what the path is. So the path is the stone. It's lovely stone, lovely brick.
That's right.
And with the grass.
The path is York stone, which is the same material as the ancient paving stones in the city of Canterbury.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice if you look carefully at the top right-hand picture, it looks as though there's several paths, and what we have is a circle path surrounding the labyrinth to give definition to its outer line, which is the green grass. And that acts as a very beautiful path, actually enclosing this sense of profoundly reflective space.
I think that's the genius of this whole thing. The labyrinth is wonderful, but that there's a circle around. What we're talking about is there's a circle around the outer edge, which actually is not part of the path, but it beautifully contains it. You're not going to see this in the canvas labyrinth below, but you're going to see it above, right where your professor there in the blue is standing. That's the entry path. But I agree, Jan, that really does a beautiful job of containing it. And it's necessary. Otherwise, the field would be too big. It's too big a space, and you wouldn't feel contained. So there's lots of wonderful things about this labyrinth. So the design is just superb. Jan, I also like what you said because, as I mentioned before, there's a belief in the United States about labyrinths being bigger is better. And, you know, that's not necessarily true. I mean, huge labyrinths, you can lose your sense of that you're in a labyrinth. And so, again, that contained path is really a lovely element to this because you're always aware that you're in a labyrinth. So it's really wonderful.
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on that question of design because throughout this webinar, I won't necessarily talk about them, but we're going to see many different examples of labyrinths in universities and many different designs, many different design materials. And one of my hopes for this webinar is that people may look at something and think, we could do that.
Good.
Because we're going to be moving from permanent installations to other labyrinths that sit very, very lightly on the land. And a whole mixture.
I'm glad you used the term later in our webinar. You called it a magical mystery tour of labyrinths. But we're actually pointing to important elements. They're not too large. Just like you said, students and people could come and walk the labyrinth and still have time to get to lunch. And that's one of the successful key elements at the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral as well, because those labyrinths are not large. I mean, one is 40 and one is 36 feet. And that's a key element. And also the contained element, the beautiful winding path, the symmetry of it. So these are really key elements. I'm pleased you're pointing there. How about all the steps that you took to wind up with a permanent labyrinth and 2 canvases all at once?
It was an extraordinary experience. We are looking at an overview. If you start at the top left-hand corner, then starting with reading that article, moving on, visiting the University of Edinburgh, creating that very diverse labyrinth group, starting with our first canvas, moving on.
Then I love your color-coded system here because the green then leads from 2007 to 08.
So we started creating a labyrinth program. We were asked about a permanent labyrinth. 4 of us trained in Chartres, and we purchased a smaller canvas labyrinth. And this is the same pattern as the Canterbury labyrinth. That's the smaller picture you can see there, top left. Purchased both for use on our Medway campus and on the road. One of the things I want to mention is that a labyrinth can be a wonderful conference resource, but I'll talk a bit more about that shortly.
It's very true. It's so much can. So, Jan, with all of this, then what were the challenges as you look back at this? What was the biggest challenge?
Well, I think there were 2. One of them was the sheer speed with which things were happening. People in the labyrinth group were saying to me, can't we look at a permanent labyrinth? And I was saying, let's just hold back a bit here. Let's be realistic, you know. This is not going to happen quickly. I was so wrong.
Right.
But that was not always easy. the sheer speed of it was a bit overwhelming. The other factor is that we're talking about a resource where much of the work on the labyrinth that has previously been done, the books by yourself, Lauren, the books by other people too, looking at the labyrinth as a resource for spiritual development. And it had become clear to me very early on in my reading that we could build on that work and look at the labyrinth as a resource for deepening reflection, for quietening the mind, a resource that we could bring into a very secular university environment. The fact that labyrinths are found all around the world in so many different faith and community and cultural contexts made it possible for me to bring a labyrinth to Kent, which is a very international university, as many universities are these days. But I was bringing this resource into a very secular context, and much of my time was spent talking about the labyrinth in ways that related to the academic community, in ways that people could relate to. So I've been talking about the labyrinth for deepening reflection, for calming, for alleviation of stress and anxiety. And I've tended to talk less in a university context about the labyrinth for spiritual development because I wasn't there in that role. I was not there in a chaplaincy role. And that's a difficult path to walk sometimes.
It is a fine line sometimes, for sure. But so you were wise in that you transposed language. It's more like, and they might be used in hospitals as well, stress reduction, quieting the mind. You know, it's the same as saying contemplation, but that's a spiritual word, whereas quieting the mind is more of a secular. You know, people understand that. So you were very wise in that, Jan. And that is a fine line to walk.
The way that I tend to describe it now in academic contexts, and others actually, is that the labyrinth offers a meditative walk, a walk that can be meditative, but that it's appropriate for people with no prior experience of meditation. And I find people can really relate to that. But what we're looking at now is a picture of how the university itself, the university community, began to really embrace the labyrinth. The picture that you can see on the left is a picture by a student. This was a student media studies project. I'm very grateful, by the way, to the many photographers who've been very generous with the images that I'm able to share with you today. So this is Leanne Lee's photograph from her days there as a university student. The picture on the top right, this is a creative writing workshop led by Sonia Overall, member of staff of the University School of English. And people began to use the labyrinth in all sorts of different ways. And that was wonderful. That was very enriching. So we were learning, and everybody around us was learning how the labyrinth might be fruitful.
Jan, that shows good leadership, because that's the thing. Once you get labyrinth in, see how it permeates into a community, and you're really doing that by letting many groups. I mean, you know, many groups using it, applying it in whatever way. It's really wonderful.
And this is, of course, like many open-air universities. Anybody can go to the labyrinth any time, 24/7. The labyrinth is next to a cycle path and a public footpath. People go there and sit in the middle, relax. People go there and put on drama performances. All sorts of things happen. But I want to pick up on that question of community, Lauren, because, of course, those of us that began at Kent and trained with Veritas became part of that community. And while I was at the Veritas Facilitator training in Chartres in 2008, I met both Ruth Sewell and Di Williams. And it was Ruth's inspirational idea to start working on a book to draw together ideas, very practical ideas, about working with the labyrinth. So this book came out in 2012, and here we've got another very beautiful photograph of the Edinburgh Labyrinth with this dancer. And you can see very clearly the materials used there.
It's really wonderful. And this is very important. This came out in 2012 in the UK. Really a great resource. And the whole sense of being able to continue to spread the word, about labyrinths. It's a big world out there, isn't it, Jan?
Well, one of the things I would really like to get across is the exciting possibilities that are there. Not only the inspiration of working with people with so many different ideas, but just finding out the possibilities. I think you said yourself once, Lauren, that the possibilities of work with labyrinth are limited only by our imagination. And in this book, we have examples of work in a secure psychiatric hospital, of work in schools, of work in guidance and counselling contexts, of work in play and art and community. It's just wonderful, the sorts of different work that are going on.
It's really, that's the beauty of it, that the labyrinth has such versatility that it can go into any situation and deepen the experience, open people's awareness, open people's hearts, including conferences. Jan, I know you've done a fair amount of conferences.
Well, that is so. And of course, working in an academic community, there are numerous possibilities. This was a cross-disciplinary event, joyfully called Happenings and Knowledge Promenades. And the idea was to draw together academics from a whole range of different disciplines to play and to experience a number of different strands of practical, creative, experiential learning. So the labyrinth was just one strand. And as you see, it was almost Christmas, and we made the most of the opportunity for candlelight. That group of people are running around a labyrinth that we chalked together.
In the lower right.
In the lower right, yeah, that's right. And there's lovely feedback from one of the respondents, a day when we were able to open up thinking and exploring space in that way with a gentle touch. A real pleasure, and has given me much to think through. It was a day that challenged and broadened horizons. And one of the very powerful ways in which the labyrinth can work in an academic context is as the metaphor of journey. Because we can think about our journeys as students, our journey to the present moment, the pathways that have brought us to now. We can think about our academic careers. We can think about our journeys in the wider community, our aspirations and where we hope to go to in the future. And we can think about our strengths and the challenges that we're facing. One of the conferences where I've held a labyrinth workshop, the theme was academic values. And I asked participants to reflect on the values that they held most dear and that they would fight to sustain. We had such a lively discussion that it was quite difficult to draw the discussion to a close. But we then took some of the key ideas that had emerged from that, absolutely core values that people really held as treasures and as critical in their lives, and walked the labyrinth holding those values in our minds and hearts. And that was really a profound experience.
It's a very good example, Jan, to help people deepen their own reflection and reflection on journey into life. And of course, that's a crossover to the spiritual values, if you ever wanted to go there, or if our listeners are working in that more than academia. That it's a really beautiful combination and a weaving together for sure.
And another strand to weave together in teaching and in learning is creativity and playfulness. There's a whole strand of research and practice developing at present about serious play, using playful approaches. And if anybody is wondering, yes, on the right-hand picture, the right-hand strip of images there, you can actually see a labyrinth. Mm-hmm. That's a labyrinth made out of Play-Doh, and is one of the... I worked with a labyrinth walk on a number of occasions with the Association of National Teaching Fellows. Part of my own journey, my own life path, is that I retired from the university in 2012, and the Association of National Teaching Fellows is now very much my own academic community. It's a very rich and creative and supportive community.
I want to take a moment just to acknowledge that it's no small thing to receive a National Teaching Fellowship like you did in 2005. That's really an amazing accomplishment, and I know that's also connected you with others, as you've mentioned, and as you'll show. But it's really a profound tribute to your work, Jan.
Well, thank you for that, Lauren. I really appreciate it. And one of the great joys has been the opportunity to work with other National Teaching Fellows. Because I'm coming on to talk about the book that Bernard and I are working on, I want to mention Emeritus Professor Bernard Moss specifically here. You can see images of Bernard's work both in the faith context and in the university context. And Bernard is Emeritus Professor of Social Work, Education and Spirituality. And he and I have been working now for some years on the book that is coming out on Saturday, 23rd.
Isn't that wonderful? Congratulations.
I'm so excited about this. Part of what I'm excited about, Lauren, is the extraordinary diversity here of the work that is going on in teaching and learning with the labyrinth. There is a great richness here within and across academic disciplines, in guidance, in development services, community, enterprise and outreach, all of these in a higher education setting. So being aware of the time, I think what I'd like to do now is almost fly into something of a magical mystery tour and drawing us along. Well, I'll say something about the context very briefly. The earliest labyrinths that began to get used in universities were probably the canvas labyrinths first introduced by Viriditas. In terms of permanent labyrinths, the first permanent labyrinths that began to be built in university settings have on the whole tended to be in three different fields, either in chaplaincy or memorial contexts, or as beautiful features of the landscape and garden contexts. And this is a very recent example. This photograph was taken in March, and I'm grateful to colleagues at the University of Aberdeen for sharing this wonderful springtime photograph. Aberdeen is in the north of Scotland, very cold weather, and these are early spring flowers for us. So a very beautiful image.
Very lovely. And that's happening more and more, and we want to encourage it if any of our listeners are in that position, that botanical gardens, for instance, at Ohio State University, they're on university campuses, and they have lovely labyrinths. And so this is a whole other avenue that people could pick up on in this work. So thank you for showing that.
And another strand, of course, is artistic installations. And we have here an extraordinary labyrinth created by artist Luis de Soto at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And we can see here that this is a labyrinth where really only one or two or three people are likely to be able to walk readily at one time, because it's a labyrinth of light and shadow. So as soon as you've got a crowd of people's shadows, the labyrinth will disappear. But as a place for reflection, for one or for a few people, this is just glorious.
It really is an amazing art installation. Jan, do you know how far across the labyrinth it is? How big a labyrinth? Do you know?
I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. But there's information online. Luis de Soto has very generously shared these photographs with me, but I didn't take notes of the dimensions.
Sure.
But you can see there's people in the distance, and that's a fairly wide staircase. So I think that's quite a large labyrinth.
Extraordinary.
So we have the idea of labyrinths being introduced as memorials in landscape contexts, as works of art. But in recent years, there has been a tremendous surge of interest in using the labyrinths for teaching and learning. And it's being used in a number of different ways. So just to flag up here, it's being used internationally. We have this glorious photograph by Jeff Saywood of a labyrinth at the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, India. And this is the Chakravyuha pattern, the Indian classical labyrinth pattern. Still a very ancient pattern, still a classical pattern, but a labyrinth that is there for prayer and reflection in the grounds of the temple, and the temple is itself in the grounds of the Institute of Technology. And here, one of the things that you can see is that we're working with what's available. This is a labyrinth made out of boulders and swept earth. In some ways, nothing could be simple. The addition of prayer flags is joyful, absolutely wonderful. But this labyrinth would not have cost a lot in terms of materials.
That's right. It's really a good example of it, isn't it? And not only do the prayer flags add, but it's what we would call a low-end labyrinth. This is not an expensive labyrinth, but it looks so part of the earth. It's just so beautiful. It's really lovely.
Isn't it indeed? And I really think it's amazing what can be done. So just moving on here, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say I think this is the most recent university labyrinth outdoors in the UK. This labyrinth was created by Sonia Overall at Canterbury Christ Church University for a conference last September 2015. And Sonia created it with paint on grass. Sonia, by the way, is one of the contributors to our book, and she writes about the work that she's done with her creative writing students. But this was a conference labyrinth. Lots of people got to walk it, and then the grounds team got involved. They were really, really interested, and it's the grounds team that are now maintaining this labyrinth. And you can see that this is a Mon Grass Labyrinth. This is a very light touch labyrinth indeed. And yet very simple, very beautiful. 7-circuit classical labyrinth on a historic site in the heart of Canterbury.
That's really beautiful. It's such a great example of a mode labyrinth. Again, something that's not expensive, but indeed very effective. It's really, really lovely.
And here, Sonia's working across disciplines. The conference was a conference to do with spirituality and imagination. Sonia's academic discipline is in creative writing. And moving on here to the new labyrinth at Dublin City University in Ireland. This labyrinth, led by university chaplain, but with the close involvement of the School of Nursing at the university and the counselling service. And it's making connections in these ways that I think really open up possibilities. I want to highlight the possibilities of working across disciplines, and here making connections between academic colleagues and development services. This is gorgeous. I would really like to know how the Metropolitan State University gets Snowfall to behave like that, to reveal the pattern so beautifully.
So this is just imprinted in the snow.
No, there is a beautiful paved and grass labyrinth underneath that.
I see.
And this is what it looks like in full snow. Now, this is in the older tradition of labyrinths as a memorial. This is a memorial to a much-loved senior member of the library team at Metropolitan State University. But this is an example of a library labyrinth. It was a library initiative. It is seen as part of their contribution to reflective space and reflective learning. And in fact, the library has finger labyrinths available at reception for students.
Lovely.
Wonderful ideas going on there.
That's lovely.
And I'm going to change countries, but to stay in cold climates now, because this is another chaplaincy initiative by the Reverend Anke Bolstad. Anne introduced labyrinths to her 2 university colleges where she is chaplain. And what she actually found was that it was this creative initiative of working with scarves that really drew the students in. They really wanted to get involved. So I want to acknowledge here that sometimes people are hesitant, whether it's students or staff. There is no doubt at all that not everybody is going to say yes. And what Anne has found here is a very, very colourful, wonderfully creative way of drawing in her university community. And not this photograph, but this labyrinth features in the chapter in our book by Di Williams, who takes us to a number of universities and gives us a number of examples of chaplains who introduce the labyrinth to university settings, but then work across university services and across disciplines, seizing the opportunities, thinking outside the box, and being really open to creative opportunities. I hope I'm beginning to give you a sense here of the sheer variety of what's going on.
You certainly are. I think this is a wonderful variety and a wonderful selection. And I'm glad that you mentioned Di's book as well, because there's wonderful photographs in there of many labyrinths. So your point is well taken, Jan, that sometimes labyrinths are intimidating to people, or they don't understand them, or they, kind of don't know what they are, or they think they're a maze. That's certainly true in the United States, and I imagine that's true in the UK as well. But this makes it accessible and easy and something fun to do, and so I think that's really key to that. So thank you. That's great.
And I've got some more images of that sense of fun and huge enjoyment a little later on. You know this labyrinth, but I don't think you know it from this angle.
Not from this angle. Looks like it's from a drone, but this is Helen Malcolm's wonderful rural health academic center. It's a fabulous labyrinth. I dedicated it, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years. It's beautiful.
It is indeed. This is taken from a machine that over here we call a cherry picker, an extremely tall crane. You can just see the structure of it in the foreground. And Dr. Helen Malcolm and her colleagues are working with the labyrinth in some fascinating ways. They're working with medical students. This is the Rural Health Academic Centre, and students are going out to work in some very, very remote and isolated communities. And so stress levels are very high. And it is a requirement in Australia, in the UK, in the United States. There are specific requirements that medical students have to achieve. And amongst those are a requirement to be able to take care of their own health and well-being, a requirement for deep reflection on their professional practice. And this includes management of their stress levels as well. And so Helen is working on mindfulness and on stress reduction and on deepening reflection, all through work with this very beautiful labyrinth that is very, very close to the hub of where the students are working. So it's very immediately available to them, and an academic medical context.
And Jan, one thing I would add is that Helen is not in Melbourne. She's in Victoria, and so many, 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 many miles away from Melbourne. And so they themselves are out in the, often referred to as the bush. I mean, it's really very rural, although not as rural as some of the doctors are going into that she's training. But one of the unique capacities of this labyrinth is it was built by one of the people on the grounds who happen to have experience with tile. And so this is a tile, beautiful tile labyrinth, a beautiful, quite amazing. But one of the unique qualities that just happened was that the tile does not collect heat. And this is in the middle, not in the middle of Australia, but it's in a very hot area. And that labyrinth is just as cool. It's just really wonderful. So that's another element of if anybody's thinking about building labyrinths. So I'm very happy to see this. And so other people can see the setting that Helen works in. Helen happens to be on our board as well. So it's really wonderful.
And I'm moving on here, staying in a health-oriented context. You don't have to have a large-scale labyrinth to work with labyrinths.
That's right.
So within the book, for example, Nina Johnson in Canada is working with paper labyrinths with her students in research that looks at reducing anxiety levels. Mm-hmm. Having discovered how high their anxiety levels are, she's doing something very, very practical, enabling them to walk a labyrinth by hand. Mm-hmm. Here at the University of Bradford, in this midwifery art workshop, you'll appreciate that with 30 contributors to the book, everybody has made a wonderful contribution, and sadly, we haven't got the time to name everybody here. Yeah. So I hope that contributors listening in will forgive me. But this is a workshop led by Liz Whitney, and this is really about deepening reflection and encouraging midwifery students to think creatively and to think outside the box. Mm-hmm. And I'm very glad that one of their students agreed that we could share this wonderful artwork.
Mm-hmm. That's really lovely.
Then what we have here is a labyrinth made out of sand and candlelight, and you can actually see on your right the impression that was left. This is another example of working very lightly, working with a very light touch. Mm-hmm. These were landscape students with an artist in residence, Jim Buchanan. This is another conference, Leadership and Professional Development, and a conference on contemplative education. And you can see that a participant here is writing about their educational journey, their life journey, how you decide to tread your path, how you choose to interact with them. And this participant has said, this is a lovely journey, lovely metaphor for my journey, an educational or life journey, being present. It really is about the journey, not the destination, and is about how you decide to tread your path, who you meet along the way, and how you choose to interact with them. And there is growing interest in contemplative education, the Centre for Contemplative Mind and Society, for example. And I would encourage those listening, if they're interested in this, to explore it further.
Mm-hmm. That quote at the end is such a wonderful integrative piece.
This is a dance theatre project back at the University of Kent, where students and academic staff actually worked together with residents of a care home, and it was danced memories, extraordinary dance performance using the labyrinth as a wonderful theme of our life journeys. So glorious photographs there. And this was bringing me back to the University of Kent and the activities there now, because of course people sometimes say, well, what's happening now at the University of Kent since you left? I think you can see from here we have the Students' Union and Kent Sports publicising the labyrinth to alleviate stress during exam season. The Child Psychology Research Unit encouraged families, this picture on the left, to come visit during research projects. There was a Shakespeare Festival held at the Labyrinth. A student was awarded a Creative Campus Championship because the Creative Campus at Kent has been a wonderful supporter of the Labyrinth project. All sorts of activities going on, and it's a sense of real richness that actually I've let go, I've left, but there are many other people still engaging with the labyrinth. It is rooted now in the university's life. And I'd like to just read this quote. The book and the gift to us all that is the Labyrinth is an invitation to seek a better and more humane way of being and doing, and of allowing the human spirit, however we conceive it, to infuse and enthuse our shared teaching and learning, so that what we seek to offer our students is ultimately life-enhancing.
That's really, really lovely. And that's, you know, to me, you're talking spirituality, but you can't say that in a university setting. But these are exactly what we need to do. We need to help people learn deeply, reflect, contemplate, and it's really all here, Jan, in your work. The next slide, you have yes, that's what I want people to see. JanSellers.com, so that's where you may want to go for more information. And Jan, your book is going to be out in April 23rd, so that's coming up real quick. How will people get a hold of it?
They can order it through Veritas's own A-store. They can order it from their friendly bookshops, and it's on its way to the States this week, and on its way around the world. So it will be available in the UK from Saturday, in the United States within the month.
Okay, great. So we'll certainly keep an eye out for it and all, so for sure. Also, if you're interested, and we hope you are, in terms of programs both in the UK, through Jan's work, through Diane Williams' work, Di Williams, also our programs in Chartres, please go online and look at that. We have Phil Cousineau joining us. Jan, I don't know if you've met Phil or not, but he's a wonderful filmmaker and just a very creative human being. He has about 40 books out into the world, and he's joining us in May, and so we're wanting and encouraging people to come there. I remember the wonderful days that you were at Chartres with us. It was really lovely.
Absolutely, Lauren. I would really encourage people to explore both Chartres, Iona, and other opportunities for facilitator training. I found it very rich myself. And can I just say thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to the participants for being present.
Absolutely. And the interest in labyrinths continues, and someday people will look back and see us as kind of the early pioneers in something that really helps people quiet the mind and organize chaos and come to a place of strengthening within themselves. And I think that your illustrations and your photos and your presentation really illustrates that, Jan. So thank you very, very much. So thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate your being here, and keep an eye on both what's happening in the UK through Jan's work and others, as well as Veritas. So take care. Again, thanks. Bye-bye.